Welcome to the Side Hustle to Small Business podcast powered by Hiscox. I'm your host, Sanjay Parekh. Throughout my career, I've had side hustles, some of which have turned into real businesses. But first and foremost, I'm a serial technology entrepreneur. In the creator space, we hear plenty of advice on how to hustle harder and why you can sleep when you're dead. On this show, we ask new questions in hopes of getting new answers. Questions like, how can small businesses work smarter? How do you achieve balance between work and family? How can we redefine success in our businesses so that we don't burn out after year 3? Every week, I sit down with business founders at various stages of their side hustle to small business journey. These entrepreneurs are pushing the envelope while keeping their values. Keep listening for conversation, context, and camaraderie. Today, we're kicking off a 3-episode series where we take a deep dive into a topic alongside seasoned professionals. In this episode, we're focusing on marketing strategies for small businesses. We're joined by Jon Katinsky, the president of Hothouse, a branding, content, and design house, and Javier Santana, the chief experience officer of Chemistry Agency. Guys, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here.
Glad to be here. Thank you for having us.
So before we kick into the real meaty questions, I'd love for you guys to both give us kind of a couple of minutes on your background and what got you to where you are today. Jon, if you wouldn't mind, let's start with you.
Happy to do it. I come from an entrepreneurial family, so it was probably destiny that I was going to own my own agency someday. But I took a circuitous route to doing it. After college, I got my first marketing job and worked for American Express Travel Services. So I became a brand manager for American Express. I had the tough first real job of moving to Hawaii for a year and launching American Express's Hawaii vacation line. So from that point forward, I think my career was all downhill. I worked for American Express in marketing for about 5 years. I started what would be a pattern in my life, which is shifting between working for agencies and working client side. So after American Express, I worked for a public relations agency, running their hotel business for Courtyard by Marriott, and flipped back to another agency where I did sports marketing and brand activation. And that led me to a fantastic job at Nike. I helped Nike launch their regional marketing practice out of Atlanta. We started a marketing office in the Southeast. We had to basically activate all of our sponsorship deals with professional teams, college teams. It was a trial. It worked really well. And I moved out to Beaverton, Oregon to run that program for the U.S. So did that, had a wonderful time doing it. My wife is from the South and missed the sunshine, living in Portland, Oregon. So came back here. I worked for Turner Sports. I ran sports marketing for TNT and TBS. For a number of years. And from there, I used that as a launching pad to start Hothouse. So I wanted to own my own marketing agency. And I was lucky enough that Turner Sports and Nike were my very first clients.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, we are all crying for you for your first job being in Hawaii. That's just awful.
It's never
miserable.
been the same since.
That's awesome. Javier, what about you? Give us your background.
Wow. So yeah, very similar to Jon. I come from a long line of entrepreneurs, and it's one of those things that I've always wanted to work for myself, or at least be a part of something really big where I had a lot of decision power. I started in this business as a graffiti artist and illustrator, and eventually that led me to be hired by graphic designers, and those graphic designers pushed me to become a graphic designer. Then I became an art director of photography, did that whole stint in Miami, and then Windows 95 changed the world, right? So I became obsessed with the web. I became truly obsessed. I went back to school and actually dropped out because what they were teaching was moving a lot slower than the technology boom that we were seeing. So I became immersed into everything that was Cisco, Microsoft, back in those days, the MCSC certification. And I was in Miami at the time, and I was offered a job in Atlanta by a company named Convergence.com. I dug in my locker and I found it. And I worked with them for a while, running network ops, support desk, all kinds of stuff. And then I just went for probably about 3 years where I was working on the data over cable side of the business, and which incredible journey, because at the time the transformation was insane. Like the speed that technology was moving was just really, really exciting.
Yeah.
And eventually I had to eject from it because it was making my brain hurt. That's not how I naturally think. I'm a creative, and my left brain was hurting a lot. But eventually went back, started working on the agency side. I started a small shop, closed that down, went to work for another agency, eventually made my way to HomeDepot.com back in 2008. And this is right around the time where e-commerce was in a big boom, right? Like people were starting to take it seriously. So I did that for about 3.5 years and helped work with their teams on the .com side, but also became the head of their more immersive experiences. So I helped launch the first mobile e-com app, which at the time, 2010, was a really big deal. In-store kiosk experiences and all these things that made me really excited to the point where I wanted to do it more and more, but not for just one client. I wanted many clients. So I started my own agency and I started servicing some really fun, incredible clients, working with companies like Salesforce, Mitsubishi Electric, Honeywell, Aerospace, and to be able to do the work with these folks. And you become this almost like polyglot of industry, because you're learning so many different little party tricks, right? Because I could talk about how to change alternative fuels for turbines in a power plant because of the work that we did with GE Electric, right? So little things like that is, to me, was the most exciting thing. I've been a career student all my life. I love learning and specifically understanding the consumer behavior and what changes it. So that is my obsession. This is why I do what I do at Chemistry, just looking at the landscape and what are the opportunities, not only really thinking about how to create a digital experience, but how to create experience that crosses the line between digital and physical. Because, of course, we're walking around with a personal computer in our pockets. There's all these different ways that you can connect with consumers, and just constantly looking for ways to create almost like an atom where the consumer is the nucleus of that ecosystem. So that's where I live in at least in my own head. And that's the kind of stuff that we do and how I got here.
Yeah. That story there is it's very quintessential founder, where, we just love learning about things, and kind of your point about colleges and education not being, it was definitely like that when we were in college. I think it's gotten better now, but it's still not at that point. It's still behind. So, it's great that we have vehicles like this, to be able to talk to experts and be able to kind of understand what is the state of art and how should we be running our businesses. So with that as a jumping off point, let's talk about, you both of you work with very large companies, and I assume there's small companies too. So when you're dealing with these small companies that have maybe never had any kind of marketing strategy around them, how do you think about that in terms of advising them and understanding, how to put kind of this structure into place? John, do you want to kick us off first?
Yeah, happy to. We're kind of in an interesting situation as Hothouse. We're an agency that solves for problems of the attention economy. We're trying to help brands generate and earn the right kind of attention and convert that into business results. We do a lot of content work for very, very large brands, Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 brands. But we also work with a lot of what we call mid-market brands that maybe people haven't heard of before, but they have aspirations, they have budgets, they have smart people, they have good products and services. And so when we think about those brands, it's our job to help them start with a great strategy, make sure they understand their consumer. Javier, I'm sure, can talk about this all day. The consumer rules everything. And if it's B2B, your customer, they are setting the rules for how they want to be engaged. So we start there. I think with small brands and mid-sized brands, it's about helping them make hard choices. You're never going to be able to do everything you want or need to do. And if your strategy is good and your expectations are realistic, and we really start by kind of defining what success looks like. And you really have to be prepared to, depending on your budgets and your resources, stair-step your way to success in many cases.
Yeah.
Okay, John, you said something really, really important there, right? Because priority is everything, right? If you try to do everything at once, you're never going to be able to accomplish anything. But it's really interesting, because I think that specifically for small businesses, and in some cases medium-sized businesses, they tend to talk to each other rather than to the consumer, right? Like that's just a very common thing. using buzzwords and lingo that really only makes sense to you. And it's really difficult for people to resonate with what you actually do as a business. So helping them really get buttoned up first is really how we look at it. For some of my former clients that I have worked with that were like small mid market, we would do a lot of audits for their content or whatever it is that they're trying to push out into the world. And then we would dissect it, and then we would test it with their supposed consumer and get real raw feedback about what meant what and what people resonated with. And that was really important. But I think getting buttoned up is so important. A lot of businesses are moving so fast that, their web properties are not saying the same thing as their collateral is. And to be able to bring all that together, to have one unified voice is so important. And I think that's foundationally something that needs to happen really early on. And that a lot of people don't invest the time into doing it because they're immediately want to go make money, right? Like, hey, we got to go to market. We got to pay ourselves. But if you don't take the time, even if you're, I think, John, you said it yesterday, fixing the plane while you're flying or something along those lines. Somebody said that to me yesterday, stuck. You have to really take a moment to, while you're out there hustling, while you're out there, selling and creating products, whatever it is, to really dedicate some time in between to solve your own internal problems, or before you know it, it'll be a very difficult thing to recover from.
Yeah, could not agree more. And one of the things I think you just mentioned it, the leaner your resources are, the more important it is that you're buttoned up and you're ready to optimize the opportunities that come your way. So if you've got a small advertising budget and you're trying to drive e-commerce, you better be sure that your landing pages are ready to go, that that everything is optimized, because you are going to spend your money trying to drive traffic and you want to be able to optimize that traffic. So a lot of businesses, I think there are things they can do to be better ready for the opportunities that are going to come their way. And a lot of times, if you're spending your money and you're not ready to optimize, then you're kind of throwing some money away.
Yeah. So I think you guys have hit upon a really important kind of piece there. So for most small businesses, they've got this sea of opportunities that they're trying to hit, right? Like obviously there's a website, and then there's collateral, the physical collateral, but then there's LinkedIn, and then there's TikTok, and there's Twitter or X, and Blue Sky, and Threads, and there's all of these things, and a lot of them, and there's Facebook, of course. There's so many things, and they start some of these things, and they can't keep up with keeping them all up to date. So what should somebody like that do? Like, how should they think about this, and how should they organize their efforts when they know they don't have enough manpower, they don't have enough money to be able to execute all of these things? How should they think about the things that they do on kind of a day-to-day, week-to-week basis?
I mean, I'll start here, John, and this goes back to exactly what John said earlier: prioritize, right? You don't belong on every channel, right? I've had clients who are in industrial manufacturing, and they're considering going to TikTok. Like, your audience is not there. You know what I mean? So I think that you have to really understand your consumer, understand where they are, meet them where they are, right? And then prioritize and focus on those specific channels, right? Everybody wants to have a lovely website and a big website, but to John's point, if you're not ready and you're dumping money into media, it's going to flop, right? So you can't have the same conversation everywhere. You have to have the same voice and tone, but you have to be, in the case of X, you have to be short and brief, right? In the case of Facebook, right? I mean, are people really doing business there? No, but you want to have presence. That's a different conversation that you're having. So I think that it's really thinking about the channels where your consumers are, what is important to the consumer and to you as a business, and then focus and don't go on TikTok if you're in industrial manufacturing, right? And I think it's just like one of those things where there's just an audience that just does not live everywhere, and I think that's just something that investing into understanding that and where people are consuming content is so important in the very beginning.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think there's always this sort of balancing act between performance and branding. And they don't have to be mutually exclusive, but depending on what someone's objectives are, depending on where they are in their brand lifespan, Sometimes you need to try to do both, and it's a tricky balancing act, but it does not do much good to be transactional and drive business growth if you're not going to be remembered. And if you spend all your time trying to be remembered, but you're not getting conversions, you're not going to be in business very long.
Right.
So I think for all the right reasons, it again starts with the consumer. And I think brands need to figure out, what does success look like and focus on that success. And sometimes that success is going to be getting traction with a specific consumer segment because you can prove to yourself that it works and you can expand it. But small businesses never have enough money. They never have enough resources. And these are all hard decisions, but the brands that embrace those hard decisions and kind of have a clarity about what success looks like, they're going to do better.
Yeah. So let's drill into that a little bit of what does success look like? How do you measure success? Right. So, you do things and okay, for some people, it's like, oh, this TikTok video went viral, but does that really matter at the end of the day? So how do both of you think about this for your clients in terms of how do you measure what is working and what needs to stop?
It's funny. It really depends on the brand and where they are. We've had clients that are selling at retail. They're e-commerce. They're trying to expand into retail, and they've got both opportunities. And if you're going to be measured by how well did your product move off the shelves at Walmart or at Target, and you've also got an e-commerce business, and you've got to split the baby and choose between them. If you spread your efforts too thin, you're not going to be successful anywhere. And so in many cases, if you're trying to grow your business at retail, that is a very specific strategy to make that work. And you want to look like you're supporting the brand and supporting the retailer. You want to look like you're driving traffic. You're going to be relying on retailer data to decide if you're succeeding or not. That's kind of a very different approach than if you are an e-com company and you're literally going to see how effective your advertising is day in and day out by traffic and conversions. So it really depends on the nature of the business. And, if you're a B2B company, that's a whole different sort of way of going to market. So I think Javier and I have both had experience kind of working with B2B and B2C companies of all shapes and sizes. And everyone, there are lessons you can take from one to the other, but everyone's problem is somewhat unique. And you really have to look at it that way.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I think it's interesting because, how do you measure success, right? I think, yes, obviously there's the metrics of it all, right? And what is, the uptick in conversion, but market and the current times that we live in may affect that, right? But I think that the way to not only measure success in a small way, like we got a big win on a project, but overall success, I think is important that, let's start with the fact that digital properties are living and breathing thing. These things are not like a one and done. It's not like back in the day when we do an ad, put it in a magazine and see how it performed. This is really like something that you have to continuously measure, test, shift or pivot very, very quickly based on how people are interacting with your campaign, your ad, whatever that may be, in order to almost like manufacture a win. Because if you throw it all out there and you wait to see the metrics and the metrics are not good, then you're back to the drawing board, right? But if you're paying attention while it's actually in action, and we have that luxury in digital, then you can actually shift and pivot while the campaign is alive. And that really helps us like almost tailor a successful mission. So I always tell my client partners that, when you're out there and you put some media out, some paid media that's pointing back somewhere, don't measure it on a monthly basis, measure it on a weekly. Like start paying attention to that, how quickly, because if something's not performing, let's replace it quick. Let's not wait till the end of the month, right? And let's try to start seeing, what's going to get us to success. And I also push people to do a lot of A/B testing and to speak to their customers. You'd be shocked that 9 out of 10 of your customers, if you ask them, can you please provide some guidance here based on how we're speaking to you and based on how we're presenting these things, they're going to give you feedback, right? Because they're your loyal customers and you're a good partner, they're going to give you feedback. So I think that's really important for us to talk to our customers on a regular basis, create those partnerships if they don't exist, and make sure that you're constantly just, again, tailoring to the consumer and that's going to get you success, right?
Yeah. I'd like to drill into kind of, how we do these campaigns and which way both of you kind of think about them. Obviously there's one way of like storytelling, and that's probably more brand building and kind of telling the story of the business. And then the other is customer testimonials and having other people, that social proof, kind of tell that, with word of mouth being kind of the holy grail of it. But word of mouth is different than a customer testimonial coming across as, content from the brand. So how do you both think about these things in terms of the brands that you work for, and specifically thinking about it for small businesses and how they should leverage these things?
It's interesting. One of the most useful things that we see is just really strong competitive audits and competitive analysis. That can be a double-edged sword because people could sort of get into the Me Too game of my competitors are doing this, so we have to do the same thing. But there's a lot you can learn. You can find inspiration. You can find do's and don'ts. And Sanjay, you mentioned testimonials. There's a whole sort of gray area of influencer marketing now and quasi influencer marketing, people that kind of pretend to be influencers, or they're spokespersons and they seem very authentic, but they're sort of just people who have maybe some experience in a vertical, but they're not famous and they don't have a lot of followers. And so sort of separating the what's authentic from what's not, and what's a real testimonial from what's not, is always a challenge. But I do think goes back to who is my customer, who are my competitors, how are customers responding to what competitors are doing, and how am I going to be different? Because doing what your competitors do is not going to necessarily guarantee your brand success.
Right. Yeah.
And I agree with that. Testimonials to me are really hard. I mean, unless you have somebody who is just a known person that has provided a testimonial from, give it an industry. We had some testimonials from our friends at Salesforce, and these people are known in the organization. So very proud to be able to put that on our website and to say that. But we've actually seen with some industries that people are just manufacturing those things. It's a testimonial. Yeah, 5 stars all day long. But I think that when it comes to even like things like Yelp, right? Like, Yelp reviews for hospitality or whatever, those things can very easily be manipulated, right? Because I could call my friend John and tell him to give me 5-star review on my restaurant because I just got a 2-star from someone else. And I think that's really, it's really hard to get the consumer to trust you, right? And I think that you have to be very, very transparent, right? I'm not a believer in fake it till you make it. Like, I think that's just not the way to operate a business. You will paint yourself into a corner, and you will, eventually it's going to, come through. So I think that definitely just transparency with the audience, but also just making sure that if you have done something incorrectly, if you have had a failure, expose it. Say, if you have a customer service issue, Delta's notorious for this, and they do an incredible job. They will address it publicly. If somebody says on Twitter, "Oh my God, these lines are horrible," Delta will immediately respond, "We're so sorry. Where are you at? Let me figure out how I can connect with that consumer in that moment in real time." That to me is just like customer service magic, right? Yeah. So I think that there's a lot of people out there that are doing these things that are really instilling trust with their consumer. And it doesn't only happen by testimonials. It happens by you having conversations with them, and in many cases directly.
Yeah. I want to circle back to that in a minute, customer service as a marketing angle. But before we do that, Jon, you mentioned kind of influencers, and I want to drill into that a little bit because we've heard of micro influencers. Not too long ago, I heard about nano influencers, which are people that have even smaller, I guess, followings. They want to aspire to be micro influencers, which I guess aspire to be regular influencers. But what do both of you think about that as a marketing strategy for a small business? Does it make sense? Does it not make sense? Is it?
It really depends on the business. We work with a brand in the nutrition supplement industry, and they've got a wonderful product. But that competitive set is so broad, and there's some amazing things. You've got, celebrities who are respected, who are owners of companies that are doing fantastic content. And you've got people you've never heard of that feel like they're selling snake oil and everything in between. I think that, with influencers and content creators, and sometimes they're one and the same, but there are people that are just authentic to their vertical. If they're in sports or outdoor activities, or they fix trucks, that they may not have big followings, but they are great storytellers, and they're authentic storytellers, and they can produce content that feels so authentic it resonates with people. And they may only have 5,000 followers. You also have people that have hundreds of thousands of followers, and you're essentially buying eyeballs. They're not necessarily all great storytellers, and they might not come off as they will sell anybody's brand that's willing to pay them. And so I think the general sort of, as a creative agency, we really think that the story and the authenticity of the story is paramount. And, you can decide you're going to buy somebody to get their followers and pay a lot of money to do that. But you can also use influencers and micro influencers to help you tell really rich, authentic stories. And sometimes you make your own decisions to amplify that with your own paid media. And there's not one way to do it properly. But I really think it comes down to storytelling. Consumers can sniff out inauthenticity a mile away now. And I think that's the one thing you want to make sure you always avoid.
Yeah. Javier, different experience, same experience?
No, it's very similar. I think that, the influencer thing is really interesting to me, right? Because I don't want to be like the get off my lawn old guy, but I think that there's a lot of folks that I think do it right. And there's a lot of folks that are just like John's point, are just like trying to sell anything that they could get their hands on. I was watching the boxing match just this past week. And it was really interesting. The very first time I ever noticed this, that as they were introducing the boxers or the people that were a part of this, they would immediately say, oh, here's Jon Katinsky, and Jon has 1.5 million followers on this platform, almost like to elevate their social media status as if that was like clout. And I even made an observation, and I said it to the people that I was watching the fight with, and I said, this is really interesting because people really are now, that is like a measurement of clout, right? So when you start thinking about that, the influencer market, I think it could definitely help, but it can also hurt you depending on what you are. Like, for example, if I'm, give it a name, plumbing company, I don't want to listen to a young guy that dances around doing TikTok videos about, the product. I want to listen to Bob the Plumber. Bob the Plumber, to me, that may have 1,000 followers, that content is more authentic than somebody else. So I think it's just knowing the audience and knowing, obviously, where your business needs to elevate itself to, or your products. And then, if you're trying to sell to an audience that is, say, majority, 25 to 32 young male, then, yeah, of course, you can go target a Jake Paul or somebody like that to really go after that specific audience. But it's going back to what we were talking about earlier, with TikTok and industrial manufacturing. It's not for everyone, right? I think that there's you get a lot of folks that want to chase the shiny object. They want to go and say, well, let me hang that feather on my hat and say that I took our company to the influencer, and the influencer is going to do X, Y, Z, almost as like a way to say we're trying everything. But I think that really doesn't have a lot of focus. Like it becomes really broad and inconsistent, and it get really, really tricky. So my very long-winded way of saying, yes, do I think that the nano and the micro influencers do they work? Are they relevant? Absolutely. But it is 100% industry and product dependent.
Yeah. Love it. Great advice from both of you. Let's circle back to customer service as a method of doing great marketing. What advice, I've seen this like play out on both different ways, right? There's some that, and you've seen it on Yelp, well, they'll reply back to every response, positive and negative, and be kind and helpful. And then there's other business owners that don't take that approach exactly, and they take the aggressive approach, confrontational approach. So, and I think if I'm thinking about it, it's hard when you're a business owner because this is your baby and somebody is attacking your baby. So what advice would either or both of you give to a small business owner in thinking about how do you do customer service in a way that actually uplifts your brand and expands your market instead of, destroying it, honestly?
Honestly, customer experience it's sort of the hidden superpower that I just don't think enough brands think about, big or small. And these are people that have purchased through your company. They are your first line of evangelism. If you convert them, the word of mouth, the referrals, that cost you nothing but a little bit of time and effort and thoughtfulness to cultivate, compared to paid media to replace those people if they don't stay. So I think there's so many good ways to do it. Starting with just removing the friction from the transaction experience on the front end. It should be as easy as possible to purchase and as intuitive as possible to purchase. I bought a nutritional supplement, last year, and it was a small company that was very highly rated, and I would get these shipments in the mail, and they were literally handwritten notes from the team with kind of motivational sayings on a card. And it was so different and so small and so thoughtful. And for all I know, they're circulating the same notes multiple times, but it was unexpected, and it was a little touch of humanity that you don't get to see in brands, and it stood out. I think the notion of following up with customers to make sure that they appreciated their purchase, those types of things go such a long way. And I think too many brands want to take your time, and they want you to do surveys after purchase. What they really should be doing is thanking you for that purchase and figuring out how they're going to reward you and make the experience better. But it is just one of those things that typically you're not going to ask your marketing agency to do that for you. But I think marketing agencies would love to play in that space all day long, because I think there's so much opportunity there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I agree. John, I'm just going to not talk and just agree with everything you say. I think that just kind of works.
We can tag team.
No, it's really interesting. I think that I can only speak to for myself here, but I think about every customer. I'm building a partnership. This is not a one and done ever, right? And I want to make sure that I am building those relationships, fostering them, and making sure that I am there for them every step of the way. I've had situations where I've had to stop everything that I'm doing and participate in a project because I got wind that somebody wasn't happy with something, and I will stick with that project until the very end. I don't have boundaries when it comes to my clients contacting me. Like, I have clients that will contact me on a Sunday at 6 p.m. I'll get a text message and they say, "Hey, do you have time tomorrow to meet?" Absolutely. What time would you like? I'll schedule the meeting right now. That's how I operate, right? But I'm building those long-term partnerships. But when you really think about it, regardless of the business that you're in, the customer journey starts with the discovery, right? And it ends with, you go through the pre-engagement, post-engagement, and then there's this massive bubble called advocacy, right? And if you can really treat a customer, like John just told that story, that was a very memorable moment for him. He's going to tell that story and he's going to name that brand to someone, right? You created such a great customer experience that John has just become an advocate, and you're not paying him anything for that. I mean, he's a nano influencer, but it's a
micro nano
microscopic
a pico influencer.
But it is. I think that those moments that you feel like somebody treated you special, somebody treated you right, those are very memorable. And then there's other moments. And I had a situation recently where I was extremely disappointed with a brand that I'm very loyal to. I rented a car, which I normally do every time I travel from the same company. And after I turned in the rental, a day later, I got an email that was obviously like a robotic email that said that there was damage to the vehicle. And I was like, wait a second, there's no damage to the vehicle. And when I looked at the photos, they basically scan the cars now through like a light, machine. Right. And there was apparently like a little ding. When I tell you a little ding, it wasn't even the size of my pinky nail. A little ding that was not visible with the human eye. But through this X-ray machine, they were able to see a little warp in the light. And when I started to zoom in, I was like, this is like smaller than half of a keyhole, right? I'm like, are these people crazy? Like, why would you ever do something like that without having somebody look through it, first of all, right?
Right.
Is this real damage? Am I about to upset my customer? Let me send a personalized message, or make a decision. Hey, this is regular wear and tear. I'm not even going to bother contacting this customer who's loyal and has been with us for 15 years. So I think that there's certain things that sometimes make you feel like you're just a number. Telephony companies were notorious for this back in the day. During, and Sanjay, you remember this because as the mobile market started to explode, you really did just become a number, and customer service was just non-existent. There was a lot of times that I really thought to myself, they probably have a script on every single thing to say if you're upset, to point the blame back on yourself. And it's just such a horrible customer experience, and they think that they have you locked in because they're monopolizing the system. But people will leave; they'll find a way. They'll find a way to leave it.
It's funny you mentioned that, and we're talking about customer experience. There was a time, this is now probably well over a decade ago, that I called my mobile carrier because I had a problem with my phone and something wasn't working right. And it ended up being that I was talking to somebody out of England. And I could recognize because of the accent. And then I asked, hey, where are you based out of? And they told me, and we started going down the path, and I had to reboot the phone and do a bunch of things. It was going to take a while. And I told him, I was like, well, I can just do this stuff and then I can call back if it doesn't work. And he was like, no, I'll stay on the phone with you. I want to make sure you get taken care of. I was on the phone probably no less than half an hour. And that stood out to me. And that carrier is actually still my carrier today. And that's probably part of it, right? It's like, I know if I call, they're going to make sure I get taken care of. They're not in a rush to get me off the phone to improve their customer service metrics of, we answered calls and got them off in 2 minutes or whatever it is. So, it makes you not feel like a number. It makes you feel like you're actually cared for, even though I know I'm a number. I mean, I'm one of, millions upon millions of customers, but
now you're also an advocate.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about kind of the times where things have gone wrong for you guys in terms of marketing campaigns. I think you can learn a lot for when things go wrong. Both of you have undoubtedly executed on marketing campaigns for clients that have gone horribly wrong. What did you learn from those experiences? How did that change you in terms of moving forward and dealing with clients moving forward after that? Javier, you want to start us off?
Thank you for that. True confessions.
So I won't go as far as I don't have a lot of major failures in actual campaigns, but I've had some pretty significant ones in product. And I think that I'll give a really good example. This one's actually really funny. I worked for a company which I will not name that they sent a bunch of signage to get translated. Right, for their Hispanic audience. So it was supposed to be, in Spanish. And when the signs came back after they invested this major amount of dollars into it, it was all lorem ipsum. It was Greek. But because they didn't have any quality assurance, nobody that spoke Spanish looked at it, right? And they wasted all this money. So the reason I even tell that story is because I think that when we are creating campaigns and experiencing Sanjay, everything I talk about always goes back to audience. I mean, it's always going to go back. And I think that if you are marketing to a Hispanic audience and you have a room full of white male executives that don't know how to speak to that young Hispanic audience, it's destined to fail, right? I mean, you need somebody in the room that is part of that conversation. And I think that we've had campaigns, we've had products in the past that very similarly, you are targeting a very specific audience. And if you do it incorrectly, it's going to fail. I'll give you a really quick example. I'll try to make it quick. We created this is back in like 2010. I'm lying, probably about 2012. We created a prototype, a tablet experience for an audience. This was a brand that was selling shoes online, and they were transitioning. Their audience was using more tablets that had these great stats. And we built what we thought was a best-in-class experience. I mean, we had the quick buy, the big chunky buttons. It was just beautifully done. We were patting ourselves on the back, and we thought it was incredible. We tested it with the audience and it failed miserably. It failed. Terrible. The reason it failed is because this was an audience that was a little older. Remember, this is 2012. You have a boomer audience that really wasn't so sure that they wanted to give the credit card into the computer, right? They wanted to make sure that they ordered it correctly. So they wanted, like, we removed a lot of things to make the add to cart and the checkout process more streamlined, and it terrified them. They were like, you're asking me for all my information. I don't know you, and I don't think this is a good idea. So they were abandoning, right, in the testing. And man, I gotta tell you, I was so ashamed. I was so ashamed because the biggest mistake, the mistake that you never ever make, do not ever make an assumption about your audience.
Yeah.
Right? We were looking at it as a product. We're creating a best-in-class product for an audience that didn't want that best-in-class product. They actually wanted to check everything 3 times. So that happened one time and one time only for me. I'll never make an assumption again my whole entire life about what an audience is thinking, no matter what I think I know. I am going to test it. I'm going to research it. I am going to ask everybody and their mothers. I am going to make sure that we are so 100% positive that this is going to test positively with an audience. But yeah, so that was a major failure. It was an incredible lesson that I learned, and it helped me specifically and the people around me think differently about when we're creating products, digital or physical, right? Like, make sure that you are testing with the exact audience that you're marketing to.
Great advice. Jon, what about you?
Okay, true confessions. Years ago, we had an entertainment client that used to do an annual holiday promotion, and that promotion happened on air in hundreds of cable television markets, and it also happened in hundreds of retailers. We had a name for this promotion that came out every year. And one year the domain had expired. And by the time we realized it had expired, someone had bought it. A squatter had bought it. And as the deadline for the holidays kept coming up, we were having to try to negotiate to buy this name without letting this squatter realize just how desperate we were, because we had shipped point of sale materials out with the URL. And it was definitely a touch and go negotiation. We ended up getting it without breaking the bank. But yeah, I thought someone was going to lose their job and lose their agency over this. What we learned from it, other than the fact that I have no hair left from that experience, is you cannot plan enough. Everything needs to be double checked, triple checked, and details matter. And we talked about how fast you need to move in the world today. You have to be able to test and optimize and change and do all these things on the fly, but you have to have processes for quality control. You have to train young people who are coming up to ask the right questions, and question and details matter. And I think, that was, it was a right experience for us at the right time in our agency life cycle. And I think just as as the world keeps moving faster and faster, and as clients have to make faster decisions, sometimes you just need to take a minute and breathe and say, have I thought of everything? What can go wrong? And try to make sure you're planning for what could go wrong, not just hoping for what could go right.
Yeah. And for our listeners out there, make sure you have auto renew turned on for your domains and the email address that those notices go to are a good email address, and your credit card doesn't expire. Put it on your calendar. Yeah. That when your credit card expires, like all these places that you need to update your credit card so that you don't lose your domain. That's like it's a silly expense for no reason to do that. So
absolutely.
Yeah, no, it is. And make sure it's not going to your AOL account.
Yes. Make sure it's not going to an old email address. Make sure it's your current active email address. And when you change email addresses, make sure you have a list of all those places that you can update that at. Okay, last question for both of you. Marketing and all of this stuff is changing so quickly and so fast. What's the new stuff that's coming up that you're super excited about that could be meaningful to somebody that's starting a business and something that they should think about leveraging, about how they market things coming up in the future? Jon, you want to kick us off?
I'm really tempted to say AI, but I'm going to go in a different direction.
Okay, good. Everybody says AI.
Exactly. We're a creative agency. We're storytellers, and especially since we're talking about small business, the emergence of NIL opportunities, name, image, and likeness endorsements with college athletes is really, no pun intended, it's a game changer for, I think, small businesses. There's right ways to do it and wrong ways to do it, but these are athletes that have amazing stories. They have amazing opportunities for brand affinities and connections. It's still a relatively new space, but there are partners you can use to find these athletes, pay them, and we're not talking about people that have millions of dollars and are driving Lamborghinis to school. We're talking about athletes that in the past have not been able to work part-time jobs. Their sport that they play is their part-time job. And when you can find the right athlete and you're a brand to tell your story and it's authentic and there's a connection there, it can be great, cost-effective advertising and social storytelling. And we've seen opportunities where brands have done it really well, especially in the small business space. So just something to keep your eyes open for.
Awesome. Javier, what about you?
Man, I obsess over AI, so I'm not going to talk too much about it, but conversational search is really interesting to me, right? Because I think that now we're going to have to start thinking about how to create content a little bit differently, where it's a mix of storytelling and mix of Q&A. Because when you're speaking into your device or, Google or whatever, voice assistant you want to, or GPT, you're asking a question that it's trying to respond to very quickly. And the way that you structure your content is going to start to help elevate you. And can I plug a podcast?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Okay. So I listened to Hard Fork. We were talking about this from the New York Times. That's where I get all my nerdy technology news, and they do a really incredible job. But the two hosts there had one episode where they talked a lot about conversational search. What does that mean for SEO? What does that mean for SEM? And it was really, really very interesting. I found it extremely interesting, and I've been trying to think about how to help my partners with some of that, like to get them prepared for how they should structure content for the future of how we search without a screen.
Yeah, both of those are fascinating. I hadn't thought about NIL. As something that small business owners, as well as structuring your content, you're absolutely right. If we can make it easier for these things to answer those questions for us, it's only going to help us kind of in the long run. Javier, Jon, this has been fantastic. I hope it was a lot of great advice for our listeners, but thank you so much for being on today.
Enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you. This was a lot of fun. I appreciate it. We'll do it again, Sanjay, whenever you're ready.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Side Hustle to Small Business podcast, powered by Hiscox. To learn more about how Hiscox can help protect your small business through intelligent insurance solutions, visit hiscox.com. And to hear more Side Hustle to Small Business stories or share your own story, visit hiscox.com/side hustle to small business. I'm your host, Sanjay Parekh. You can find more about me at my website, sanjayparekh.com.